Remember the past, treasure the present, and pray for the future. Let's take a fun ride through history while learning something. Does it record? Before we get into the 15, we must make a brief visit to our ancestors. Ah, you know a story isn't a story until you start off with once upon a time, there was a young girl to whom we do not know her real name. She was around the age of 15. As generational story brings it, she went off to the well to get a pail of water. Unbeknownst to her, there were slave catchers in the mist. They were not supposed to be in this area, but they were. They saw her and were captivated by her beauty and decided to stay an extra day to capture her. The next day, there she was once again, going to get water. They realized that this was not your average young girl, but she was the daughter of the chief in the village, so that would make her a princess. They made the decision to capture her. The slave catchers had to leave fast as they were carrying precious cargo. They knew that the wrath of the chief would be something that they could not win, so they moved fast. The way it was described is that there was a many moons walk to the holding place where we are assuming was in Zanzibar, from where they captured her. Once they made it there, she was cleaned up, she was placed on the boat, and headed to Virginia. There wasn't much talk of how long that journey was, but from what we've learned throughout history, it was no cruise ship. Once they docked, she was placed on the auction block, and there was John P. Justice, who said he liked her hips. So he put in a bid and won and took her home. He gave her the name Priscilla, but you know how it is in the South. You got to give a nickname. So they called her Scylla. As the story goes, she was too pretty to put in the field, so she worked inside the house. That old John Justice had a cabin built in the yard. Some said it was under the house, but what we know was it was nowhere near where the others were kept. Not long after that, he began visiting the cabin, and a little bit more than usual. And from those visits, children were produced. They were as follows: Betty, Henry, Patton, Peter, Simon, Violet, Hannah, Catherine, Richard, Moses, Douglas, Jane, Elizabeth, and Nathaniel. I won't go into detail about each of them, but I want to make an honorable mention to Violet. She was given to her white sister as a wedding gift. She was to be her personal servant. Well, they were right happy with that, and they took her on their honeymoon trip on a steamboat so that she could wait on her sister's every beck and call. Well, not our precious Violet. Slavery was not in the cards for her. That African blood that pulsated through her veins begged to be free. So she did what she was asked, and that old groom asked for a drink, and she brought her sister's new husband drink after drink after drink. Yep, you got it. She got him drunk. We're not drunk enough to get him to sign for a pass for her, and she managed to get off that boat. We don't know if it was a stop or if she jumped ship. Either way, she got off that boat onto the great state of Ohio. From what Grandpap said, she sent word that she made it. She lived there, and that's where her descendants live to this day. We don't know if she lived passing as a white woman or a free black woman. What we do know is that she lived free. Now, where was I? Oh, yeah, John Justice. Well, his wife Elizabeth got tired of old John visiting Siller, and she told him they must go. She told them to sell them now. Well, John didn't want to sell them, for these were his children, and he had grown fond of Siller, and they all lived in the yard in that cabin that he built for her. So he made a deal with his cousin, John Hogue, who just so happened to be a preacher, lawyer, and doctor. Ooh, child, you read that right. To take them as his servants. Soon thereafter, that old John Justice passed away, and he did the unthinkable, the unimaginable. Clutch your pearls for this. He put in his will, which was dated September 18th, 1850, that the justice slaves were to be free and inherit his land. Woo child. Yep, you read that right. And get this, his wife Margaret actually filed it on January 16th, 1851. But that didn't make John and Elizabeth children warm and fuzzy. No, sir. That bunch lawyered up and took Scylla and her children to court over and over and over again until they dried up every penny that Priscilla children had. Unfortunately, they lost it all, but that old preacher man, John Hogue, kept them at his house, or shall we call it what it really was, a plantation. And they continued to work on that land while they were technically free. After all, John Justice had freed them. That Mr. Preacher Man, Doctor Man, Top Dog Lawyer Man, he had his nerve. As Grandpap once said, we weren't immigrants, we weren't aliens, and we weren't refugees. We were captured and brought here by the people who had forgotten about the hereafter. John Hogue happened to have his niece named Florence living with him, and she was a daughter of James Hogue, which was John's brother, by a slave named Nancy. She had come over from the Howard plantation. Her mother's name was Sally. But Florence wasn't your ordinary slave. Her mistress, which was her sister Margaret, they called her Peggy. There's that southern nickname again. Well, Peggy did something that's highly illegal. Are you ready for this? She taught Florence how to read and write. Back then, this act was a punishable offense that could result in the world's worst whooping or even death. Florence worked with her uncle in the field and tended the wounded soldiers and rode around in that buggy. That's what she called it. Not to mention, she was the first school teacher in that area after the Civil War. She definitely wasn't your average lady of color for those times. Well, a young lad named Nathan, which was the youngest child from Priscilla and John Justice, well, Nathan fell in love with their new master's, John Hogue's niece Florence. They courted and were married. Now, in 1963, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and many slaves were freed. But the gotcha was the enslaved Justice tribe were freed before then. But this allowed them to move about, and they were allowed to leave the whole plantation. Now, some of Priscilla's children left, and some stayed and worked and were paid and had housing until John Hogue's death. Psst, take a look at that picture of the house. That is the actual house that John Hogue had his Justice tribe living. Mhm. Now, this is where it gets good. In John Hogue's will, Priscilla was named as well as some of her children, which brings us to the good part. This means Priscilla lived through capture of the Middle Passage ride, two slave masters, and she was even listed in the Freedmen's Bureau. Whoa! Now that is something to be proud of. That DNA that flowed through her now flows through us. Simply greatness. Well, the Justice tribe left that house, and they had houses built next to one another, so says the census. Well, the happy couple of Nathan and Florence had a whole whopping of kids. Look at this here. Their firstborn child, a girl that they named Nancy. Well, I'm not sure how the story goes, but she met a young man named William Honecker. He was the son of a highfalutin man that left William a lot of land. They called it Camp Branch. After they were married, they settled in Camp Branch. Aunt Nan sent word to her father and mother to pack it up and come to this settlement. Get this, Aunt Nan was named after Florence's mother, Nancy. And Nancy went to Camp Branch with them. She had a spinning wheel and many dresses. Unfortunately, they didn't last from the fire. From when Grandpap said Camp Branch was partly a settlement for the soldiers. Those soldiers treated Nathan and Florence right nicely. Grandpap Nathan and grandmother Florence had many children: Nancy, Ulysses, Joseph, Charlie, Henry, Edna, Mariah, Anna, and Peter. Now it must be something with those baby boys because here we go again. Peter, which was the youngest son of Florence and Nathan. Peter Nathaniel Justice met and fell in love with Adeline Rickman. He gave her the nickname Cotton Top because of her blonde hair. And the story goes, he would take his shoes and carry them around his neck. And the closer that he got to Adeline's house, he would wash his feet in the creek and then put them on. After all, he wanted to look dapper for her. They fell in love and had many children. Here we go with the magnificent. Let's get into it. Nora Justice Green. Nora, affectionately known as Nori, married Henry C. Green. Aunt Nora, the eldest of the bunch, was pure unintentional comedy. Once during Thanksgiving dinner, her high strung sister Loretta said twice, "I want to sit next to Pap. I want to sit next to Pap." Finally, Nora said, "Loretta, I don't care where I sit. I can sit in the corner and eat out of a saucer." She met and married Henry C. Green, and he whisked her away to Lexington. Unfortunately, later in life, they divorced, but that didn't stop Henry from coming to Tram every year with his maker's mark in his pocket and a smile on his face, and he made it to all of the family picnics. And to this union, 9 children were born. Art Dimple Green, William Green, Mary D. Green, Henry Clay Green, Rosa Lee Green, Daisy Marie Kirtley, Gladys D. Wilson, Shirley Elliott, Charles Lewis Green. Florence Katie Justice. Florence Katie Justice married Henry Bryant. After his death, she was married to Fergie McWhorter. She had no children. She lived a very fast paced life. After her first spouse passed away in the coal mine in Wheelwright, she went up north and married another man and ended up getting tangled up with the mob. And she wanted out and began running from the mob, changing her name and her location. Unfortunately, they caught up with her and she was poisoned and killed. Grandpap was called to come to Ohio to claim her body. Interesting fact, there was never a death certificate, no record of her body being moved, just the story from Grandpap saying that the gangsters telling him, "Don't ask any questions, get your daughter's body and take her home." Polly Justice. There isn't any record or pictures of Polly, only an inscription on her headstone that reads, "Little Polly. May her sweet little soul rest in peace." Nathaniel Peter Justice. Nathaniel Peter Justice married Rory Lone. No death date for her. After that marriage, he met and married Bertha Pearl Owens. Well, he took her up north and settled in Flint, Michigan. After he married Bertha Pearl, he started to notice something wasn't right. Not sure if it was the food or the house, but this was something that he wasn't used to. Nope, not one bit. So he brought her right on back down to the South to Tram to his sister Marie and asked her, "Teach her something, please." Them doggone Justice men were spoiled. To this union, 3 children were born. Bruce Justice, the twins, George Justice, and Jacqueline Barnett. Shh, guess what? There was another child to whom I do not have the information of her mother, but the child's name was Mary Justice. The last information that we pulled on her is that she was living in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Rumor was old Nathan's baby brother Sidney tried to find her, but we don't know if he succeeded and kept everything quiet. Clyde Justice. Clyde married Ruth Owens. Clyde was, as said, the populated Lexington. To this union, 10 children were born. June Willis, Tanya Gates, Beverly Justice, Linda D. Justice, Mary R. Smith, Clyde Justice Jr., Georgia Elizabeth English, Clydette Justice, Hazel Marie Fields, Genevieve Simon. Yep, Uncle Clyde and Aunt Ruth were quite busy. Onita Justice Crawley married William Amos Crawley. There were no children to this union. It was said that Amos was not a nice person to our Onita. They were both school teachers. Onita had a fine fondness for children and wanted some of her own. Well, she was ill and in the hospital, and Grandpap went to go visit her. And she begged Grandpap, "Please bring me some apples." He grew really good apples at home. He didn't want to leave, but he did what his baby wanted. He went and got her some apples, and Onita passed away while he was gone. That hurt Grandpap so bad. But sometimes they say you don't want your family to see you pass, so you send them away to prevent them hurt. I'm just saying, she loved her father dearly and probably didn't want him to see her go. Hazel Marie Justice. Hazel Marie Justice, affectionately known as Aunt Marie, she never married, but she was a mother, caretaker to her grandparents, parents, siblings, and a host of nieces and nephews. She even had several nieces named after her. Aunt Marie would always make a large meal for Thanksgiving and the 4th of July for her family and friends. We would all sit at the table in shifts because There were so many of us that we couldn't sit down at the same time. Those meals created memories for everyone. Often there were times when her siblings came home to recharge their batteries, and she never asked why. She just opened the door and allowed them in. She was a no-nonsense woman who spoke her mind and left every conversation in peace. She was the backbone to the magnificent. Adeline Loretta Dill. Adeline Loretta Dill married Horace Raymond Dill. It was said that old Horace came to Tram and Grandpap had his daughters out tending the garden. As he was walking by, he made a noise, and all of Peter's daughters raised their head to see who was passing by. Horace said he saw different shades of the rainbow with eyes that twinkled like diamonds. Loretta looked at one of her sisters and said, "Who is that onion head boy?" Little did she know that was her future husband, and they would have 4 onion head children. To this union, 4 children were born: Anthony Raymond Dill, Dr. Kenneth Lever Dill, Juanita Kozel, Paul Stanley Dill. Atchie Dolores Bolden. Atchie Dolores Bolden married Edward D. Bolden. It was said that when Edward Sr. met Atchie at a department store, he couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't wait to run home and tell his family he had met the most beautiful woman in the world and he was going to marry her. A true love story because he did. She loved him in health until his death. And in her sickness, instead of woe is me, she sent word to her siblings. I need them to keep my children together with my babies, with my family. Her concern was not for her, but for her babies, to which her baby sister Bertha said, "I'm on my way." To this union, 4 children were born: Joyce Joella Owens, Edward Bolden, Gina Hope Bolden, Robin Marie Johnson. Inez I.O. Justice, affectionately called I.O. I.O. never married, nor did she have any children. I.O. was a blessing in everyone's eyes. Some people that met her were astonished by her intelligence. She would often sit in her chair, sling her can of King Edward's tobacco with the lids to make a loud clunking noise, and sometimes would call out, "Ma!" to which everyone would turn around. When we would arrive to Tram in the middle of the night, Marie would say, "Io, point to such and such, point to such and such," and she would actually point them out. But don't make her mad by running past her chair. You were promised a good old-fashioned twist pinch. And if you cried, your mother would give you something to cry for because you shouldn't have been irritating her in the first place. Everyone was protective over Io. Her sister Marie said during the big fire, she was too scared to run in and grab items in fear that Io would run after her. Marie would rather lose it all than her precious Io. Flora Pauline Mayo. Flora Pauline Mayo married Mark Mayo. Pauline was a woman of wise words. She would often tell of family histories, and her daughter Anna would record them. She loved her family. One tidbit of advice that she gave that is prevalent to this day, she told her nieces when they came to visit her while she was confined to bed. She said, "Look at me in this bed. I always put off everything to wait for retirement, to do this, to do that, to travel the world, and cancer has taken me out. Everyone will enjoy my fruits of my labor, but I won't. Don't put off what you want to do in life because tomorrow is not guaranteed." To this union, 4 children were born: Mark Maury Mayo, Hope Mayo, Renee Mayo, and Anna Mayo. Rupert Trimble Wilson. Well, that old Peter couldn't contain himself. At one point, while still married to Adeline, he had a relationship with a beautiful woman that lived up the road. Her name was Hester. People from around these parts called her Hess. To this union, a child was born whose name was Rupert Trimble Wilson. Yep, you guessed it. He had a nickname. They called him Trim. The 15 became the 16. If you ever saw a picture of him, he looked more like old Peter than the rest of the 15. There was no denying him. Well, Rupert Trimble Wilson married Ruth Branham. To this union, they went on to raise Mortland Hunt. Well, that old Trim, before he settled down, he decided to go up north and he met Mildred Taylor. Into this union, a son was born, Donald Wilson. Well, that old Trim had another relationship with Dixie Lackey. Into this union, a daughter was born, Rosalind Oliver. That sly old Trim. Bertha Mae Justice married Henry Carl Habron. When these two got together, oh Lord, it was Hen and Bert. They were the hard-working couple that opened their houses to everyone, and many siblings, nephews, and nieces came to live with them. No one was turned away. When Bertha's sister Atchie passed away, they opened up their home to four more children. There were moments at the dinner table when Hen would look at a child and say, "Look at that. What's that over there?" And as soon as the child looked, he would take their food. But old Bert made sure to replace it. Bertha was known to open up the kitchen window, pull out her gun, shoot some squirrels, coons, you name it, and bring it in and clean it. And guess what's for dinner? Teresa would often say it wasn't nothing to come home to see fresh food to clean, butcher, and mostly pluck feathers, which Gina hated. They left the country, but the country never left them. And to this union, five children were born: Sandra Mae Wimberly, Jonathan Habron, Henry Allen Habron, Brenda K. Davis, Teresa Caroline Elbert. Infant son Justice. We don't know if Adeline and Peter named this baby. We just have a headstone that reads Infant Baby Justice. May his sweet soul rest in peace. Harry Nicholas Justice. Harry Nicholas Justice married Lassie Kidd. Story goes that they were the example of interracial marriage, that love wins, and this came from an interracial couple in Tram. Well, Mr. Kidd, Lassie's dad, just hated that his daughter ran off with a man of color. Small unknown fact: Nick wasn't allowed back into Tram after running away with Lassie. The kids were looking for him to harm him. When Nick's mom Adeline passed away, Nick risked it all to be there at his mother's funeral. He had to hide under the casket hidden by the skirt during the whole funeral. And when it was over, he had to hide in between the walls until the coast was clear to leave. He loved his wife, but there is nothing like the love of a boy and his mom. To this union, six children were born: Nikita Hasselman, Uganda Dotson, Janata Justice, Tahana Justice, Joaquin Justice, Taimani Broadbert. Sidney Grant Justice. Sidney Grant Justice married Elizabeth Dean Mays. While building his dream home in Davison, Michigan, Sidney's siblings came over to help. They were all trained in building homes. Well, Bertha brought her family, and they were running around. Bertha told them, "Stop running while we're working." But Gina had other plans, and she ran right over the open floor that was to be the basement. Brenda said all that they could hear was Gina's voice. "Aunt Bertha May, help!" Old Sidney and Dean looked in that hole, and all you could see was the back of Gina's turncoat sticking in the air. Dean screamed, "Sidney, get her!" Old Sidney had to climb down the ladder and grab little Gina, which is now covered in dark mud. Dean cleaned her up, and Sidney, Nick, and Bert went back to work. To this union, four children were born: Anita Gail Merriweather, Yvette Pamela Justice, Craig Raymond Justice, Keith Bradley Justice. So let's take a look of days past. Justice Family Picnic 2026. After slavery, families were so torn apart, no one knew where the others were. If they were able to reconnect, they all made a pact. Meet here this time next year. This will ensure that we are forever connected. And as a tradition, that is what we're doing. So please, let's keep their hopes alive by meeting here next year. You never know who may not be on this side next year. Love on one another as much as we can. We are the descendants of determination, strength, and love. Forever justice.